It's time for Prove All Things, a Bible discussion program on the Word of God. A panel of preachers will deal with your questions and comments. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, abstain from all appearance of evil, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. What?
You might want to say that again because I didn't have your audio on.
Well, Engineer Dave, I see, is up to his old tricks and hasn't been turning our audio on. It's good to be with you. I missed. I. What would somebody turn? What's going on in here?
That was me.
My goodness, you people forgot how to do this while I was gone.
Ed said no sound, and then suddenly we got dual sound.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Okay.
All for you, Ed.
That's right. I did get a note. I was reading through last week, and I did get a note from Ed Rangel, who said that you're doing a great job soloing it, Alan. And I did appreciate it. I have soloed this thing before myself, and it is tough.
Yes,
to sit here and just keep talking. But I did appreciate it. I kept hoping all afternoon. That ordeal started out about noon. And I kept hoping all afternoon I could make it here. And I think I got in about 8 o'clock, right as the program was going off the air. So anyway, it's good to be with you today. This is Prove All Things. We're here for your Bible questions or comments. The program's a whole lot better if we're not just sitting here talking and you are inputting. You can do this 2 or 3 ways. Many of you've listened to us before. We're going to follow the chat conversation on YouTube. We're on YouTube and Facebook. On YouTube, we'll follow the chat conversation. On Facebook, everybody knows how to comment. You can comment on YouTube. We'd appreciate if you'd like us, maybe share the program so we can get some other people interested. Program's brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis, Indiana. You can also call us at 317-257-3000, 317-257-3000. And on my right over here is John Hines from the Pelican State?
Sportsman's paradise, but yes, we are known for pelicans as well.
Okay. What's the state bird or whatever?
Yes, Louisiana.
Yeah, I know.
People down here say it's the greatest state out of all 50. So
absolutely,
it's got to be true.
That's true. Well, it is pretty good. You got alligators and good fishing and swamps and all sorts of good things.
Yeah.
And New Orleans. Do you ever go to New Orleans? It's on the other side of the state, I know.
No, most folks around here don't, actually. It's the state really is, it's different from north to south. And I'm in the northern part, and folks up north don't think too much of New Orleans, so they don't.
Oh, they don't go down there. You make it as far as Baton Rouge.
The only place you want to go less than New Orleans is Baton Rouge. So.
Okay. Okay, my goodness.
Needless to say, I do not sit on the Board of Tourism for the state of Louisiana.
Apparently not. Apparently not. Over here on my left is Bob Hines. No, that's not right. I'll get it right. What is your name? Alan McKee.
I'll be Bob Hines tonight. I can do
Hey. How are
he's
you
a whole
doing?
lot. He's a whole lot better Bible student than I am.
Oh, well, we'll get him on another day.
So-
Alan McKee, we do appreciate your soloing it last week. I tried hard to not, but
Well, it was an interesting experience.
I never saw so many preachers who could, had to go test their yoke of oxen and this, that, and the other, or who had married a wife and had to go and whatever. There are a couple things left over from last week. Let me tell you about this. There's a local preacher who shall remain nameless. He was on the whole bunch last week because I wasn't here. He is a preterist, and we have sort of banned him from the program. So I wasn't here last week, so he started sneaking in. But here's the deal. I don't want to be mean, but we have offered this fella for, I guess, 2 years now or more. We've offered him the opportunity of a public debate on the subject of preterism. We've offered to have the entire debate at High School Road. So far, he refuses to do that. But he does try to sneak on every now and then and ask this question or that question. Doesn't do a whole lot of teaching. We asked him a question a while back, and he never has answered it, which surprises me. He ought to have a good answer to it. Now, we might, if things get slow tonight, I might go back and sort of review that material for you. But what we asked him was, what is the one hope of a Christian? You're well aware Ephesians 4 speaks of those 7 ones: one Lord, one faith, one baptism, so forth. One of the things there of those ones is one hope. So what is the one hope of a Christian? So far, for some reason, he can't answer that, which sort of is amazing. But you would think a gospel preacher, he could whip that right out and straighten us out on what the one hope of a Christian is. He can't say it's the resurrection, which the Bible says repeatedly couldn't be the resurrection. It must be something else. So, according to his doctrine, the resurrection's already happened. So, Christians today don't have that hope. So anyway, we're looking forward to hearing from him about that. We had, I was going through the questions on last week's program. Some of them you guys probably got on the air, but I'd kind of like to know what you said about them. Here was one from Dario. He asked, are we going to just take the Church of Christ to identify ourselves? I assume he means the term Church of Christ, or take some other biblical description other than Church of Christ. What did you guys say about that?
I said the answer is that the church, the Lord's church, is identified with a number of different names in the New Testament, and that we call ourselves Church of Christ, yes, because of Romans 16:16. But there are many places where the Church of the Lord's church is identified as the Church of God, the Church of the Firstborn, and even the Church of Christians, I believe, in one place. And all of those,
Church of the Firstborn one.
huh?
Church of the Firstborn one.
Yeah, and these are all valid names, and so we are not bound by any means to. We could simply call ourselves the church. That's what that's what the name was used in the New Testament, and so we're not bound to any particular name. What really is important, not so much the name as what we teach.
There you go. I will say this, Dario, that sometimes, especially when you're traveling, it's a little helpful to sort of know what that group is. In other words, there's other churches called the Church of God, and so it can be a little confusing sometimes. So it's kind of nice that maybe a lot of churches use the same phrase to sort of identify who and what they are. But no, any of these designations, I've numbered them at some time. I think there's 12, 13 of them, would be fine. What do y'all call the church down there in Louisiana?
The Lord's Church, Church of Christ. I think the point is that all those designations in Scripture they all mean something. There is a meaning behind it. It's the Church of Christ. And I was just thinking about the verse in James when it talks about those who blaspheme that noble name by which we are called. And perhaps that's talking about blaspheming Christians. And I'm not going to call myself something different just because someone blasphemes the name of Christian. I'm still going to call myself a Christian, and it's not just a name, it's what we do, it's what we are, it's the Church of Christ, it's the church God purchased with his own blood, it's the church on and on. So it's a description of who the people are and what they do.
All righty. Here was another comment or a question. How will we judge angels in 1 Corinthians 6? And what did you say about that, Alan?
I pointed out the passage that I believe it's in the book of Jude, if I remember right. And Jude, I think start there. And see if I can find what I'm looking for here.
Okay.
Let me back up for a second.
Let me suggest to you what I don't know what you're looking for in Jude, but let me.
Here we are.
Oh, you got it. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is not in Jude. I'm sorry, it was in 2 Peter. We went to this passage in 2 Peter 2, and it said that if God did not spare sinning angels, but thrust them down into Tartarus and delivered them into chains of darkness, being reserved to judgment, and he did not spare the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth one, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, he condemned them with an overthrow, setting an example to men intending to live ungodly. And he delivered righteous Lot and oppressed with their lustful behavior of lawlessness. And I made the point that if God is going to judge sinning angels, why are these angels sinning? And the answer would be because they are caught up in unbelief. And if we are going to judge angels, it will be judged, I think, on the basis of they failed to believe, they failed to maintain their faith, and we do. And, they have in my mind, the greater advantage in that they have the direct interface with God, or at least they don't wonder, is there a God? They know there's a God. They have been in his presence. And yet here we are, who we are trusting that there is a God. We are believing there is a God. We have faith. And we will therefore judge these angels who we have faith even though we did not see. They lost faith even though they did see.
All right. I would suggest to you maybe a couple of other ideas if I can
Absolutely
get everything going here. One of the ways in which we're going to judge, for instance, I would call your attention to Matthew 12. It says here in verse 41, the men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. Behold, a greater than Jonah is here. Mm-hmm. And in verse 42, the queen of the south, Queen of Sheba, shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, for she came from the uttermost parts of the earth. And so the idea is, apparently, the judgment in 1 Corinthians 6 is not necessarily that we're going to be in some tribunal, but it's our obedience is going to condemn the world.
Our example, that's what
so that it's a judgment in that sense, yes.
Brian comments and says, does judge angels mean sitting like a judge with them before us, or is it angels judged by the behavior of Christians?
Yeah,
Noah.
I think that second idea is exactly on point.
Noah condemned the world by doing God's word.
There you
Right.
go. That's a good point.
Yeah, Noah did not sit in judgment of anybody, condemning, saying, well, you get to be saved and you don't. But he served as the example, and those who would, if any would have gone with him, they could have been saved, but none of them would, other than his family and in-laws and so forth.
Yeah. We had another question. What was restored during the restoration? The restoration is not a, what'd you say?
Well, and that was about the time I was going through my little slideshow that I had done
Yeah, I remember.
in a Wednesday night class, and was talking about the fact that those four men that are named, and that's Alexander Campbell, Thomas Campbell, Barton W. Stone, and I forget the fourth one now. But those men wanted to restore the first century church. That was their goal, was to try and restore the worship service of the first century church. And it's an admirable goal, but I believe that the church never disappeared. The church has been in existence. Jesus said, as I pointed out, that the gates of hell will not prevail against his kingdom, and I don't believe it has prevailed against his kingdom. And so if these fellows are coming along and suggesting that the church has to be restored because it's gone, well, no, I don't agree with that. If they want to say, we want to have a church worship that is restored like it was in the first century, okay, I'm good with that. I don't know that it's disappeared, but you haven't found it, and you want to restore it for yourself and your congregates, if you will.
That's good. That is good. There's, you named 3 or 4 there. Some of the men before them, James O'Kelly, Adam Smith, James
Yeah.
O'Kelly in North Carolina, and Adam Smith up in the New England states, and some others perhaps even before that in Scotland. Perhaps the Haldanes and some others. At least seem to be talking the right talk. We had one other question that we're going to deal with. I think Engineer Dave promised we'd deal with it. And this is kind of a long letter somebody put on. This is from Gerald. And I don't know who Sam is. Apparently this letter, Dear Sam, we don't know all the background of this letter and so forth, but I'll read it to you. I am stunned by your letter informing me that you will no longer represent me as my attorney. Being a single mother, the mere fact of losing your services is overwhelming. Your reasons are even more devastating. The DUI charge looked terrible, especially since I'm a Christian and so active in our church. But the truth is, I really had not had any alcohol. When I got that call from the babysitter, I don't know what that is, I forgot that I had just taken one painkiller. The effects didn't hit me until I was already on the way home, and then that awful accident happened, followed by all the rest. We're left to know whatever all that is, with no one believing my explanation. I know that since you're an elder, defending me might put you in a bad light, but now is when I need your help most, because you're both an excellent attorney and a Christian brother who should believe and support me. How can you, as you said, for the sake of Christian testimony, drop me now? What's more important, the way things look or the way things really happened? I'm writing to you so you can think all this over before we talk. I'll call you tomorrow. And who is it? Gerald asks, what would you do if you were Sam? John? Go right ahead.
Is Sam the elder / attorney?
Yeah. That apparently, according to the letter.
For one thing, I don't like giving judgments on a little blurb like that. There's a whole lot more context, and we're not there, and we don't know the situation. A verse that does come to mind is 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 19. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except for 2 or 3 witnesses. And stuff like that, where there's elders at another congregation, and obviously they've made some sort of decision. That's the benefit of the church being autonomous. It's their decision to make. I really don't know what to say, not knowing all the details.
Well, in my opinion, my humble opinion, you could either represent the woman or not represent the woman. It's not a religious question necessarily.
If this is a question of elder or attorney, that's another issue.
And by the way, a DUI is not always alcohol. You can be driving under the influence of anyone of a lot of drugs or a painkiller. I think most of those painkillers say you shouldn't be driving if you're going to take those. He apparently maybe forgot that. But I wouldn't criticize Sam one way or the other. If he wants to represent her, it's a free country. He can do that. If he doesn't want to represent her, that's also a free country. It's not a moral question whether he represents her or not, or whether so forth.
And she's free to go seek another attorney.
There you go. Excuse me. Excuse me. What would you do, Brother McKee?
I think I would be inclined to continue to represent, just on the basis of the principle in this country that we have, that innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
And you know, yes, I have seen people be in a bad situation where, in fact, they really hadn't done anything wrong, but because of circumstances, it looks badly for them.
Yeah.
And so I might be inclined to say, at least until I know more, I'd be willing to continue to represent if I were an attorney.
A lawyer or an attorney doesn't represent you because they think you're a wonderful person or whatever.
Yeah, they represent you because they think there is a legal system, and that is our legal system, and that legal system calls for, you know, you to be represented in some way or another. And you know, I'm certain that, you know, there's lots of folks that are public defenders who have gone into court knowing their client was, you know, guilty as a skunk, and but also saying to themselves, this fellow deserves representation and legal advice, whether, you know, I think he's a reprobate moron or not.
There you go. Well, don't hold back, Alan.
Oh, all right. I'll just let it roll.
Okay, let me go over this preterism thing one more time to be clear about it. I don't want to be mean about that, but we spent, I think, a good 4 months reviewing preterism back about a year ago. If you'll go back in the archives on YouTube, you'll find all of those programs. We would be happy to have a religious debate here in Indianapolis. We do sort of, there's 1 or 2 churches here in Indianapolis that have taken this position. So if we're going to debate here, we're sort of going to expect you to get some support, not financial support, but an endorsement, if you will, out of one of those churches, so that you're not just Larry, the guy who walked in off the street who wants to debate. We'd be happy to debate this fellow that's the preacher at this church, or someone that the church there is willing to say, hey, this fellow pretty well represents our position on this subject. We'll have the discussion. We'll talk about it up one side and down the other. But what we found on the program here is those instances where these brethren are talking, is they never explain anything. They're just always asking a question. And they're never taking a Bible passage and trying to explain it or defend it. In fact, as I indicated, I've asked them one question. What's the one hope of a Christian? And nobody will say, what is it? What am I supposed to hope for? I asked it. I don't know. It was 6 months ago. I think we did that, and nobody said anything since. And I know these folks know that question. I don't know why they won't answer.
John, I had discussion with one of the fellows who's writing it. I don't know if this comment is on there or on your sheet or not. I hope it is.
Yeah.
But frankly, I was annoyed in that conversation because you know he wrote in as a comment that the resurrection had already taken place.
Yeah.
And arguing that it had already taken place in 70 AD. And so then I challenged him on that, and I asked him, okay, if the resurrection took place, if Jesus returned in 70 AD, are you still taking the Lord's Supper? Because over in the 1 Corinthians, Paul says we take the Lord's Supper until the Lord comes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if this fellow was honest about his doctrine, if he was honest about what he believed, he could have said something to the effect of, well, no, we don't take the Lord's Supper because we don't need to anymore. You know, that's what the passage says. We don't need to anymore. But he didn't say that. You know, are you going to teach that are we done with the Lord's Supper? Are you going to tell your congregants that no, we have no point in taking the Lord's Supper? No, instead he comes up with some other reason that even it was in capital letters. I forget now what he entitled it, but he had a title for it. It wasn't all caps, but it was two words where the first two words were capital. The first letters were capitalized, and I'm going, where's this notion come from? There's no idea like this in the Bible, and clearly he was making it out of whole cloth, just an invention. And, you know, if we're going to start doing that, if we're just going to start inventing phrases and start inventing reasons to observe things, how are we any different than the Roman Catholics? How are we any different than Joseph Smith? How are we any different than a lot of these other religious teachers who came up with one idea or another and decided to inject it into the church and decided that they had authority to do so? And if you're not going to be serious about your doctrine, then I have no use for you. I really don't have any use for you.
Well, you know, I was just looking back through here. What he said was, he says, yes, I do take the Lord's Supper.
Okay.
The coming would allow the church to become a deposit of his life. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, exactly. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Then he says,
and that was my
Ephesians
question
3, it's the eternal purpose of the church. I don't know what that means.
I don't either. If Paul tells me that we observe the Lord's death until he comes, and this fellow saying, no, that's the purpose of the church is to keep what? To keep observing these things, even though they no longer apply to us?
Oh, wait a minute. Here's another statement he made. He says, now he is, after he comes, then what? Now he is with us. We celebrate his presence, his life in and through us. That's real good, but we're only supposed to take the supper till he comes.
Till he comes, yes.
So it's nice what you're doing, but what you're doing is not in the scriptures.
You're making it up.
You made it up.
You're making it up.
I think maybe you just wanted to hold on to a tradition. In all honesty, some of these preterists have done away with the Lord's Supper.
Well, I wonder about that. I wonder if they've done away with the Lord's Supper. I wonder if they really go into their pulpit and preach to the congregation and say, none of you are going to get resurrected. Not one of you. Mm-hmm. You know, Jesus is teaching that, you know, the day is, an hour is coming when all who are in the grave will hear his voice. Well, apparently they think all doesn't mean all.
Amen. Preach on, brother. But as I said, we'd be glad to have a religious debate on this. Just let us know, and we'll be glad to talk with you about that. But just to snipe on the program and not answer questions, not deal with it, is asking a lot. What's going on over there, Engineer Dave?
Here's a question from Gloria.
He was all excited. He wanted to read that.
Sorry, Dave.
No, actually, before Gloria, Ed came on and asked a question.
Okay, let's hear it.
His question which he's been waiting for some time, says in Matthew 3:13 through 17, John said that he needed to be baptized by Jesus. Does that mean that John was not baptized? Also, in the kingdom, we tend to say that the first converts were the 3,000 in Acts 2. Who baptized the apostles?
Oh, we've been through that. Who
Yeah.
baptized the apostles? Where has he been?
Yeah, we've been through that a couple of times.
It was Fred Schwartz. I don't know who baptized the apostles.
Larry Moe and Kurt.
Of course, we know Paul was baptized. Some of them, of course, many of them were disciples of John, and it's easy to assume they were baptized by John. But the Bible doesn't detail that. It tells us what we need to do, not what they did. It tells us what we need to do. Now, Matthew 3:13 says, Then cometh Jesus from Galilee to Jordan unto John to be baptized. John forbade him, saying, I have need to be baptized of thee. Comest thou to me? Suffer it to be so now, for thus it becometh us to fulfill all righteousness. And he was asking, why did he say that?
He's saying, he was asking, had John then not been baptized? Since he was asking Jesus, he said, I need to be baptized of you. Well, I don't think that means, I'm sorry. I don't think that means that John had not been baptized. I think, though, that simply that John recognized the greater authority and the greater efficacy. Is that right?
Pretty good.
If I can strangle the word out, efficacy of the baptism of Jesus Christ.
That's a good point. I've tried to say this before. We have this tradition, and I think it's reasonably accurate, is that you only need to be baptized once, which I think is true. But that's not exactly what was going on in the New Testament. I've commented before. Apparently,
Some of these Jewish sects were baptizing day and night.
yeah, they would baptize you 4 or 5 times a day, and so John may well have been baptized, but it would not have been surprising to say that he needed to be baptized by Jesus if he had been baptized before. So it's sort of a non sequitur. Let me get John in on this. He looks pensive.
I was just taking it all in.
Is that what you were doing? Okay, Engineer Dave over here's got a hot one.
I'll add this, John,
What?
to that conversation. You know, all we know is what John says. I have need to be baptized by you. Concerning the apostles, we do know what the Lord told them when he's washing their feet, when he calls them clean. And I think he's speaking spiritually there because he points out not all of you, talking about Judas. Judas certainly was not clean. So you can, I don't know, add that to the conversation, I guess.
I agree. My simple point was that the statement here that John needed to be baptized of Jesus doesn't really say anything about whether he had been baptized before.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Engineer Dave.
Brian comments and says, John is showing the respect for this one greater than himself by asking that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
I think that's a good point.
And if we can move on, or are we ready to move on?
Move on.
Okay. Gerald comments back to our previous discussion. He says, appreciate the comments on my question. I do respect your answers. I know of a situation such as this, the names were changed.
To protect the innocent.
Yeah,
Take the guilty, probably.
the woman later had the charges dropped, never returned to the church, and received no apology from the elder. She was quite upset over her circumstances and came to me for counsel.
Okay.
So there you go. Now, do you want to deal with that or go on to another topic?
I'm sorry for the woman. She should recognize that simply because a man is the elder of the church and happens to be a lawyer, that doesn't mean he has to be her lawyer under any circumstance. Just as if you happen to be a mechanic and a Christian, that doesn't mean that I have to fix your car. It doesn't mean I have to if I'm a doctor, it doesn't mean I have to be your doctor. So you might consider that, or she might consider that. Go ahead.
Okay, and this one is from Gloria, and she says, please explain about the scapegoat of the Old Testament.
Did you put scapegoat in those air quotation marks?
Yes.
That's right.
She did?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. John, what about the scapegoat in the Old Testament?
We find it in Leviticus chapter 16 concerning the Day of Atonement, and that is when Aaron was commanded to take the two goats. And Luke 16, around verse 7, he shall take the two goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Aaron shall cast lots for the two goats, one lot for the Lord and the other lot for the scapegoat. He would bring the goat which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering. The other goat, New King James uses the word scapegoat, shall be presented alive before the Lord, make atonement over it, and then it would be taken off and released in the wilderness, if I remember correctly. And it's, not to get too speculative about it, but you have this picture of, it's all the Day of Atonement. And you have one dying and one living. And I think it's a very good depiction of how do we foreshadow, how do we look towards Jesus, who was going to die and live. And here we have a representation. You have these two animals, one dies, one lives. They both play a part in the Day of Atonement. And it's the same for us. He dies and he lives for our justification.
Any thoughts there, Alan?
Other than you've got I think there is one of the passages that says something about the sin getting transferred to the scapegoat. Maybe I'm mistaking that. I hope not. But I think if I can find that text, I'll find it later. But I think it talks about the sin being transferred, and it is that idea of, yes, one, just like Johnny said, I think I agree with his point. One dies and one lives, and the one dies, and then the other one carries away the sin. And in that sense, we have the example of Jesus Christ, who takes away our sin.
Hebrews 13 may be talking about some elements of this. In verse 10, he says, or verse 11, the bodies of those beasts whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned without the camp. Wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate. Let us go therefore unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach. For here we have no continuing city, but we seek one to come. So perhaps that's talking about. What are you rubbing your hands in glee about over there? You got another question, or were you just looking at...
Are we ready for a new topic?
Yes, go right ahead.
Well, we have a new person on Facebook.
Good.
By the way, just to remind you, we're also on YouTube. But Facebook seems to be the place that's
It's a hot
happening.
place tonight.
So here we go. Marvin asks, what do you all think about praise teams and beatboxing? Making sounds like an instrument with your voice, which is still a cappella. Does it matter how many people are in a group leading singing, including women, as they are singing the women's parts? And then he goes on to say, all are very popular in the church now.
Yeah. Praise teams. You got a praise team down there in Louisiana?
We do praise, and I guess you could call us a team, the congregation, but not like this fellow's talking about. Verse that comes to mind is 1 Corinthians 14, when it talks about singing with understanding. And in the same context, there's a verse that speaks about let all things be done for edification. And I think we've made the point before on this program, it is the words that edify, that it's not simply a catchy tune. That's not what edifies. It's words that edify. It's understanding. And I've had a discussion with some of the young ladies in the congregation here. There's a song that a lot of younger folks like to sing called Alleluia. And it's, anyway, this girl asked if I could lead it. And I said, I'll lead it if you can tell me what that word means. And she could not tell me what it meant. And I said, well, we need to study what it means then to make sure that we are singing with understanding. If we don't know what we're singing, if it's not edifying, and it's the words that edify, then we shouldn't do it.
Amen. You mean you're against beatboxing?
Yes.
You're not going to pretend to be a trumpet or a drum or something like that?
No. I could, though. I think I'd be good at it, but not as far as the church goes.
There you go. It certainly isn't done with the understanding to imitate a instrument.
I just, for whatever reason, I have in my mind an image of a comedian I saw once who could do with his mouth a pretty good representation of a police siren. And I thought, well, what if we introduced that into the church? And we were all making sounds not of even musical instruments, but of just everyday objects. Maybe I could make a sound like a telephone, or someone else could make a sound, like a telegraph machine or something like that. And we would call, we're going to call that praise to God?
Bird calls.
Or bird calls. There's a good thought.
Yes.
Along with that idea, folks who think as long as it's a cappella, because these sounds are being made with our mouth, it's okay. Why are we trying to imitate what the denominations are doing with their mechanical instruments?
Hey, we do it all the time. We try to imitate what the denomination do. Give us a king.
Ephesians 5:19, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, and not sound effects.
He says in 1 Corinthians 14, throughout 1 Corinthians 14, he says, Brethren, if I come unto you speaking with tongues, what shall I profit you? This is verse 6. I shall speak to you either by revelation, or by knowledge, or by prophesying, or by doctrine, even things without life giving sound, whether pipe or harp, except they give a distinction in the sounds. How shall it be known what's piped or harped? So he says in verse 10, there are, it may be, so many kinds of voices in the world, none of them without signification. Therefore, if I know not the meaning of the voice, I shall be unto him that speaketh a barbarian, and he that speaketh shall be a barbarian unto me. And goes on to emphasize the importance of our worship being understandable. So I think that's the answer. Now, granted, maybe 2 or 3 of those singers on the praise team are singing the song, but the rest of them are all just making thumping noises with their mouth. Let me say this now, to give you maybe a little more of my inclination. If you're talking about, I know what we call here in America a praise team, but I have seen situations where instead of one person leading the song, there were other people in the audience. I saw this in Nigeria, by the way, where they were given a microphone and they sang the parts. In other words, one lady was singing soprano, another guy singing bass and tenor and alto, and this was helping the whole congregation to sing those various parts of music. Now, I don't know of anything unscriptural about that. I know usually in the Lord's church we traditionally have one person leading. Well, there's no particular demand that there be one person leading. There's nothing wrong with, I don't think there was anything wrong with that situation in Nigeria where they sang the various parts, and everybody sang along with them. It wasn't that they were entertaining the audience, they were helping lead the singing. But I'd be glad to hear your opinions about that. I suppose nearly anything could be misused and headed in a wrong direction. It was not a particular choir situation where a specific group of people is entertaining the audience. Go ahead, Engineer Dave. Yeah. Hold on.
I was going to ask a question along those same lines. I don't know, you may have some concerns about some of the newer songs, and I guess older songs may have done the same thing as well, but some of the newer songs, you'll have, for example, the ladies sing a whole verse, and then the men will come in, not anywhere on that verse, but the next verse. And songs like that, I really don't care for, where there is a prolonged pause where the men are not singing, or the ladies, or whatever, where there is a prolonged pause where there are people just sitting there waiting their turn, and I feel like it does start just turning into they're just listening to it and a little bit of entertainment. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not hip on all the latest songs, particularly, or at least I don't know them all. I would suppose that if you're talking about the sopranos leading or the altos and the bass singing a line or so forth, yeah, I think that we might think about that just a little bit. It's certainly not the whole congregation singing.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's an interesting thought.
It goes beyond the what's that called? The call and response. It's beyond that, where it's a whole verse of just one part and then a whole verse of another part.
Yeah, it's not responsive singing, which would be, I think, is all right if it's not overdone too much. Yes, that's an opinion. Yes, Engineer Dave.
We have the same person who asked the question about the a cappella and the praise teams. He asked another question later, and this is going to be a new topic for us. It says, also, does an elder have to resign if his wife dies? Now, before you go on and answer that, Ed Rangel responded to that by saying 1 Timothy 3:2 says that an elder must be the husband of one wife. Not must have been or will be, but must be the present progressive.
Present tense.
Okay. 1 Timothy 3:2 says that an elder must be the husband of one wife. Oh, it must have doubled up. Sometimes the text messages double up on me. And then Marvin replied, that is what I'm talking about. So there you go.
I hate to do this, but I happen to agree with Ed. I've disagreed with him here and there, but I think he's got that one nailed down. It is present tense. I'm not going to push the guy out the door, but I think in soberness, perhaps a while after the funeral is over, that perhaps the man ought to step down as an elder. Apparently the Lord intended him to have a wife. The Bible does give some of the qualifications for the wife, and it isn't a present tense thing with him. And the longer it goes on, the more of a problem it becomes. I've seen some situation like this. Let me suggest this. The longer it goes on, the more of a problem it becomes, because the younger people have never seen his wife. They don't know who she was. They don't know she was a wonderful woman. And so he's just a man without a wife after a while. Oh, goodness, I've thought about this a lot. There is an elder rules, or at least serves, by virtue of sort of a moral superiority that's described here in these qualifications in Timothy and Titus. And at some point if there is a controversy or a difficulty in the church, if I were that elder whose wife has died, it would be awfully easy for somebody to say, you really are not qualified anyway. And the issue maybe that we're facing in the church is entirely different. How would I defend myself? I couldn't, because it's right. He's right. I shouldn't be serving as an elder. I've seen some men in this circumstance whose wife have died. And to me, the guy who's holding on to being an elder is sort of missing the point of being an elder. An elder rules in that, as I mentioned, that sense of moral superiority, being a wonderful Christian. And the fact that he doesn't have the title, there's my air quotes again. The fact that he doesn't have the title doesn't mean that he doesn't have that same considerable influence in the church. And there's nothing wrong with that, but why is he clinging to the role and title of an elder? He'll still be respected, and people will still look up to him for guidance. So, to me, a man that holds on to that is making a very serious mistake, and perhaps an unscriptural one. Yes.
Is the engineer allowed to ask a question?
If he speaks into the mic.
Okay.
Well, I mean, pertaining to this subject, and you kind of hinted around about it. Let me ask.
I did?
Yeah. If the elder is in this situation or similar situation, does the elder need to step down himself, or does the church boot him out?
Well, excuse me, one of you guys go ahead, and I'll give my opinion last. Alan?
My own opinion is that I think it's the honorable thing to do for the elder to step down himself.
And I think most men who ever really were qualified to be elders would do exactly that. They would step down. Now, if they're not going to do it, sooner or later the church needs to act and say, listen, this isn't right. Same process that puts you into the eldership puts you out of the eldership. And as I say, most of the influence of an elder is that sense of respect people have for you. And if you'll go ahead and act like a decent human being and have respect for what the qualifications are and so forth, then people will still have respect for your opinion and guidance and direction. You just won't have that big title, you know? You said I was pussyfooting around about it. Did we get this nailed down for you?
Yeah, I just want to know when the church needs to step in, because I have heard of instances where the elder doesn't see a need to step down.
Well, I would say first of all, the man's wife died. Let him grieve a little while. He's not going to be making any big decisions for the church for a while. And then if it isn't obvious that he's stepping down, then maybe you need to go to him privately and say, hey, let's think about this. It may be time. In kindness. And then that process in Matthew 18 goes on. If he doesn't listen to you, take a couple of more with you. And if he doesn't listen to you, then the church needs to act.
Well, it's like you said. I mean, I have great respect for a man who would step down in that situation.
Yeah.
I would have, and I know of certain folks who've done this, who've stepped down for the right reasons. I didn't lose an ounce of respect for them.
No, it wasn't his fault his wife died. And he's still a good man. Still, all those other qualities are probably still there. So, you're being quiet.
My 2 cents on a practical level. Why is the qualification there to be married? And every Sunday when I come home, the first person I ask what they thought of the sermon is my wife. and she'll probably be the first person, if I start losing my marbles, she's going to be the first person to say, honey, something's not right. And if a fella is in that position of oversight, he needs that person there. That's just one reason. And there's a reason there's a plurality of elders. You would hope in this situation, if a fella is not, if he's holding on to the eldership, that points to, that's symptomatic of bigger problems. And you would hope the other elders would have a good enough relationship with him and the backbone to go to him and hopefully address the issue tactfully at the appropriate time.
Well, you go ahead, Engineer Dave.
Marvin commented back. He says it happened at his former church. She had been dead for 10 years, and the other leadership does not want to force him out because he has been elder for 40 years.
Well, you got a problem there.
Yeah.
If he's been an elder without a wife for 10 years, there are folks who've moved into there, and there's a lot of people who have no memory of his wife whatsoever. He's just a single guy. And as John says, I don't have to give you all the good reasons God had for making this one of the criteria. All I have to do is tell you he did it. Now, like John, I can think of some good reasons why the Lord made this one of the criteria. But it ain't up to me. It's what the book says. And so we're real death on baptism, but we're going to have to accept this one too. You can't be determined in one area and, we'll let this slide in another area.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
With that congregation that the fellow's speaking about, would they let a bachelor who's never been married, would they let him be an elder?
Good question.
I'm sure they'd probably say, well, no, we couldn't do that. Well, why not?
Yeah. If you've let this guy be one for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wrong. And it needs to be solved. Apparently, it's not the congregation you worship at right now, Marvin. So it's not exactly your problem. But anyway, if it is true of the congregation where you are, then maybe you need to go to him privately and say, hey, this is wrong. Okay, what time is it? Oh, my goodness. Is that... Where's my glasses? 3:10. John Charles, goodness gracious. I'm supposed to go to the eye doctor tomorrow and get a prescription for glasses. Where's the church down there in Haynesville?
The church is located in Haynesville, Louisiana. Haynesville's right about in the middle of the state, right on the northern edge. You can check us out online, woodlandchurchofchrist.org. You can get our address, but Haynesville is a small town, just a couple thousand people. And we meet within city limits, so you'll be able to find us if you drive around a little bit. But meet at the usual times if anyone's ever in the area. We hope they stop.
Is there a picture of you out on the sign so they'll know?
No, we don't want to scare folks away.
Alan, we're going to be meeting tomorrow night. We're studying in the
Book of James.
Book of James, second chapter, finishing second, going to third. Where are we going to be Sunday morning in the Bible class?
Sunday morning we're into 1 Kings 17. We're talking about Ahab.
Ahab.
Okay. Not the fellow who fought the whale.
Not the white whale guy.
The other Ahab.
Yes. That'll be at 9:30 Sunday morning, and at 10:30 we'll have a worship service. Again, at 6 in the evening, another worship service. And this is at 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis. We hope you'll come. We appreciate your participation tonight, your good questions and comments, and it's good to be back with you. If the Lord wills, we'll be back again next week. Good evening to you.